Welcome to the Clear the Shelf podcast with Chris and Chris, the show that meets at the intersection of education and entertainment to discuss online arbitrage, retail arbitrage, wholesale, and all facets of selling on Amazon. We'll bring you news, tactics, strategies, insights, stories, and interviews to help you grow your Amazon business. And now, here are your hosts, Chris Grant and Chris Racing. What's up, Amazon sellers, and welcome back to the Clear the Shelf podcast with myself and my oleaginous co-host, Chris Racing. Today, we've got Corey Ganem with us. Corey's been selling on Amazon for years and is now 100% wholesale, sells multiple seven figures every year, runs the wholesale network, if you couldn't already see his sweatshirt. And today, we plan to get Corey to walk us through exactly how to get started in wholesale in 2025, whether you're a beginner Amazon seller or maybe you just want to add wholesale to your existing Amazon business. So, Corey, thanks for hanging out with us, man.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me back. I think this is at least maybe the third time we've
this is number 3.
I think I've been
yes,
on.
Sir.
Yeah, been on the Clear the Shelf. So we always have a great conversation. And like I said, appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Payment is one of those hoodies if they're as cozy as they look.
Yeah, it's very cozy. Yeah, one of our members printed these out and brought it to the trade show meetup this past weekend. So if you want one, I'll send it to you.
Nice. Before we get started, you guys know the drill. We spend literally minutes getting ready for each episode. So if you get some value from this, do us a solid and pound the like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment. The best way for us to grow this pod is by getting you to interact with the show and let us know that you want to see more content like this. And of course, we'll keep showing up and bringing in some education mixed with some entertainment. Let's dive in. We're gonna be on a little bit of a tight schedule today, so let's dive right into the deep end. Corey, what is wholesale and how does it differ from retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, private label?
Yeah, good question. So when I explain wholesale to people, I usually describe it almost as professional arbitrage, right? And that's not a slight to OA or RA or anybody who's getting started, but it is a little bit more of an advanced business model in the sense that instead of buying from retail stores, right, like a Target or a Walmart or Dick's Sporting Goods, we are buying from the suppliers that those retail stores are buying from a lot of the times, right? So we're either buying directly from the manufacturer or from an authorized distributor. Typically, we're buying in bigger quantities. So we might be buying 100, 500, 1,000 units at a time, and we're paying wholesale prices. So we're not having to stack discounts on top of each other to get the best price. We're typically just buying at a wholesale price or a negotiated price, and then turning around and selling on Amazon as a result. So like I said, I like to refer to it as almost like professional arbitrage, but the concept is very similar to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's kind of how stores started. You know, it's not it's nothing new. It's just a different model of sourcing.
Exactly, and the same principles apply. I'm reading a Keepograph the exact same way that you're reading a Keepograph, the exact same way folks inside the OA Challenge are learning how to read a Keepograph. Right, the principles of the business are the same. It's just sometimes the dollar amounts are bigger or the quantities that you're buying are bigger, but it's the same game at the end of the day.
Even if we've asked you this question before, I think currently this takes on a bit of a more unique or topical meaning right now. So I want to ask you about the business model in 2025. There's arbitrage sellers. You can hear them moaning on social media. They're quite vocal. There's always challenges. We lose brands, and obviously Section 3 was a big deal through Q4. Thanks for that timing, Amazon. Private label has a host of issues. Gurus don't seem to advertise that quite as much on social media, but they're always there. So what makes wholesale unique and a great idea in 2025?
Yeah. And so first of all, to your point about, arbitrage has its downside. So does private label. I mean, so does wholesale, right? Every business model has its pros and cons. And at the end of the day, certain people are going to be better suited to certain business models. Now, when it comes to wholesale, kind of the lay of the land for wholesale on Amazon in 2025 is Amazon has really gotten a lot stricter with everyone when it comes to supply chain and documentation and just proof of purchase. And it's no different on the wholesale side. So 2 years ago, you could get away with buying wholesale products from just about anyone, right? If you could find a product at a good price and you could find it in bulk, then you could buy it and be relatively fine. But in 2025 and beyond, it's not that easy anymore. You've got to be buying either directly from the manufacturer themselves, or you've got to be buying from an authorized distributor of that manufacturer. And really, if you're buying from anyone other than one of those two sources, you're taking a big risk because, as you guys know, like I said, Amazon is just really cracking down on supply chain and making sure that products that you're selling on their platform are authentic. And buying directly from the manufacturer or from an authorized distributor is typically the best way to prove to Amazon, hey, these goods are legit. Look at my invoice, right? It came directly from the source in a lot of times.
It's not necessarily to say that you won't get a section, because you had a section 3.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that. So it's not necessarily that you won't get them. It's just it can be a bit easier, showing them proof. I will say I'll take a Walmart receipt over, and I'll put it up against a brand owner's or a wholesale invoice just about any day. But there are those other places on the internet that get a little bit more difficult to prove.
100%. And I think where a lot of sellers find themselves in hot water, especially with Amazon, is they buy from suppliers that aren't verified or they're not vetted, right? And I feel like the example that we always use is the Telegram suppliers of the world or the Instagram suppliers of the world. A lot of times these are just low-level middlemen wholesalers who aren't buying directly from the brand, right? They don't have a good paper trail leading back to the brand that would allow you to defend yourself if Amazon comes after you because they think your products aren't legitimate. So we're seeing the sellers that get shut down due to a Section 3 or due to authenticity complaints, you name it. It's the sellers that are buying from these sources that aren't vetted, right? And a lot of times it's because maybe they see a deal or a lead that's super profitable, but they're not asking themselves, okay, even though it's profitable, am I able to defend myself in case Amazon comes after me in the worst case scenario? And if the answer is no, then no amount of profit is worth risking your account over, right? We've even had to drop a lot of our best suppliers where we made a lot of money over the years because they weren't buying directly from the brand and they didn't have a way to prove the paper trail of those products. Even though I knew they were legit, Amazon couldn't prove that, right? And so we had to make the tough decision to let some of our best suppliers go.
I'm going to bring up something that you haven't brought up yet, but we may talk about a little bit later. But I know that in the wholesale network, you guys will do some group buys. And that's one thing that some folks on social media will push back about. Well, how can you do a group buy and actually handle a Section 3? So let's nip that in the bud now. How would you handle that when you're, say spending $500,000 across 7 or 8 sellers for the same product?
Great question, right? And it's something that needs to be handled with care because, again, 2 years ago, you could just find some random guy on Twitter, pool your money and buy product from wherever you want and be just fine. But today you've got to go about it in a little bit more of a calculated manner. And the way that we do group buys is there's always going to be a paper trail leading back to either the manufacturer or to a very large, easily verifiable, authorized distributor. So if, let's say, myself and 4 other folks inside the wholesale network pool our money to buy a product, we're going to have that documentation to provide to each person who's participating in the deal an invoice in their name from that authorized distributor or from the manufacturer. So it's just like you're buying yourself from a legit supplier, but you're just pooling your money with other sellers to either get better pricing, better terms, etc. Right? So very similar process to how you would just buy something on your own these days.
Yeah. So just taking advantage of economies of scale, or creating they have those, they have like buying groups. Like some moms will get together and, they'll all buy together.
Exactly. Yep.
Hey, Amazon sellers, are you tired of juggling multiple tools to manage your FBA business? Well, say goodbye to the chaos and hello to Boxum, the all-in-one software that streamlines your shipments, inventory, and profitability tracking in just a few clicks. With Boxum, you'll cut your shipment time in half, gain real-time insights into your business, and keep your inventory under control, all from one simple, intuitive dashboard. Don't waste time. Try Boxum today and take your Amazon FBA game to the next level. Check it out over at cleartheshelf.com/Boxum and start your 14-day free trial now.
You said one other thing that I sort of want to rabbit trail down. You said that different kinds of people are better suited to different methods of arbitrage. So what are the characteristics that make a good wholesale seller?
I'm glad you asked that question because, yeah, when I mentioned that earlier, I was like, I really want to go deeper on that if we can. And I guess now's our chance to do so. So, when it comes to characteristics of a good wholesale seller, all right, the best wholesale sellers that I know are really good salespeople, right? Salespeople in the sense that they know how to talk to people, they know how to build rapport, they're persistent, they follow up, they're organized, and they don't let leads slip through the cracks, right? And folks might be hearing this and they might be interested in getting into wholesale, but they might be thinking, well, I don't have a sales background. I've never sold anything to anyone. Maybe I work a 9 to 5 as an accountant, for example, right? That doesn't mean that you can't build these skills. So when I say, hey, you've got to be able to talk to people, you've got to call people on the phone, you've got to be able to build rapport. Again, these are skills that you learn by putting in the reps. So just to kind of put a bow on it, the best wholesale sellers are folks that are just good at having everyday conversations with people, right? Just like the three of us are kind of here chatting on this podcast now. When you're calling a supplier, it's actually even easier than any other sales role because you're calling them looking to spend money with them. You're not calling them asking them to buy from you, right? So it's like you kind of flip the role on its head. And when I say quote unquote salesperson, I'm not trying to sell them anything. I'm actually trying to sell them on why they should sell to me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. All right, let's switch gears just a little bit. I wanted to make this kind of for like beginner sellers. So one of the questions that I always see, heck, I've got one in my email right now that I need to reply to, is how much capital does it require to someone like to get started in wholesale, but realistically?
Yep. And I mean, again, probably the most common or in the top 3 most common questions I get as well. And my advice to folks is typically 5 to 10K in capital for inventory is what you want to get started with, right? Now, if you're going to go, like, for example, if you're going to go take the OA challenge or you're going to go take the wholesale challenge or purchase information to kind of shorten the learning curve, that's in addition to your inventory budget, right? So, like I said, 5 to 10K in capital for inventory. And then if you're going to go take, one of the challenges or something like that, that money's in addition. So it doesn't take, tens of thousands, but you've got to have a little more than you would if you were, say, starting with arbitrage or even with like used books, for example.
Let's talk about structuring the company as a seller. With arbitrage, being a sole proprietor, you could basically just kind of, Michael Scott from The Office, I declare bankruptcy, I am a sole proprietor, and that's kind of all it takes. But what in particular do you need from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, good question. So really, you don't need a ton, right? But there are a few specific things that you need. So first and foremost, the wholesale business model is B2B, right? Business to business. So when I am reaching out to a manufacturer or a distributor, they're not going to sell to me. They're not going to work with me unless I own a business. So for myself and for probably 99% of folks out there, an LLC is going to be your best bet. But as always, talk to your accountant and make sure that's the best fit for you. So you're going to need a business entity of some sort, which for most people is going to be an LLC. You're going to need an EIN number, which you can get for free on the IRS website with about 30 seconds of work. And your EIN number is kind of like the social security number for your business, right? That's all it is. And what that EIN number allows you to do is open a business bank account. So it's really those 3 things are kind of all you need to get started. You need a legal entity, you need an EIN number, and you need a business bank account. And that is the foundation of your business. And once you have those three things in place, then you can go start reaching out to suppliers and putting in the work.
Now we're going to get another common question is, do you need a website? What's your stance on that?
Another good question. We're hitting all the good ones here. So my stance on a website has pretty much been the same throughout the years in that it's not 100% required. All right. So it is something that I see so many new wholesale sellers get hung up on is they're afraid to pick up the phone and call a supplier because they think they've got to have their website in place first. And what they usually end up doing is they spend a week, 2 weeks, a month or more trying to perfect their website before they've ever called a supplier, when in reality, you don't even need a website. And at the end of the day, a bad website is going to hurt you a lot more than no website at all. So if you're going to go the website route, which I have a website, I've gotten compliments on it. I think it's good to have a good website. Just make sure it's a simple one-page informational site. And all it's got to say is, hey, this is what my company is. This is who we are. And this is what we do. That simple. But it's not a 100% requirement.
I think one of the other things that people really get hung up on is what product categories or what brand should I try to go after as a beginner seller? Do you have any guidance on where people should go if there is even a direction they should go toward?
Yeah. And again, another very common question, but my answer is typically if you have a hobby or if you know a particular product category or product niche better than most people, then I would start there, right? I know a lot of people who, for example, they're really into cars, right? Or they're really into fishing. And so the folks that are into cars, I'd say start with the automotive category. The folks who are into fishing, I say start with the outdoor category, because if you've got a passion for a hobby or a passion for a niche, you probably already know some of the big brands in that niche or in that category. And it's just going to be a little easier for you to relate to those suppliers because you can already talk the talk. Now, just from a broad perspective, because all the time people will say, okay, well, I don't really have any hobbies or I don't really know any particular category better than others. Where should I start? My advice to those people is I like to see them go with the unsexy categories, the ones that aren't super competitive, right? So things like I mentioned automotive. I love automotive as a category. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I like tools and home improvement. I like industrial and scientific, and I like sports and outdoors because again, these are categories that sure, there's competition. There's a lot of people selling those products, but most people don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I want to sell industrial fasteners on Amazon, right? When in reality, there's a lot of money to be made selling industrial fasteners on Amazon.
Now, this may be, correct me if I'm wrong, this may be an oversimplification, but when you're starting at wholesale, as far as sourcing products, once you're actually trying to establish a relationship, you can go distributor route or you can go to the brand directly, right? Those are kind of the two main tent poles as far as the basis goes. Now, and you previously mentioned that you can kind of, it gets a little murkier when you deal with distributors. Obviously, the brand is the brand, right?
Yep.
So what's the best way to make sure you're going after legitimate suppliers? Or is it better to go to the brand first if you're just starting out?
Yeah, so I kind of wrestled with this question for years, right? Because when I first started my wholesale business, and even when I first started teaching wholesale, my kind of advice and the way that I would teach it to folks is, hey, if you want to work with distributors, the best way to do it is to go on Google Maps or go on Google and look for some distributors in a category that you're interested in that are local to you. They're in your town, so you can drive by and see them if you want to. And it's just easier to deal with local people. Now, I have changed my tune on that over the years because, like you said, Chris, well, Amazon's just gotten a lot stricter on the kind of distributors they like versus the kind of distributors they don't like. And at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that your distributor is buying directly from the brand, right? That supply chain is key. So now the way that I teach it is, hey, let's just go directly to the brand first every single time and try to buy from the brand, right? Now, if they turn us down, which a lot of brands will, we pivot to asking them the question, well, hey, while I have you, do you mind just referring me to one of your distributors here in my area? And with that simple one sentence question, the brand probably 50% of the time is going to give you the name of an authorized distributor in your area that then you can reach out to, right? Because if the brand told you to call this distributor, obviously that distributor is authorized. So it kind of flips the whole process on its head, which and is one of the reasons why now I say, let's go to the brand first. And if for some reason we can't work with a brand, either because they're too big or maybe because they don't want any more e-commerce customers, well, then we pivot to asking about their distributors, and then they give us a reference to a distributor that we know is authorized. So that's, really the best way to do it, and quite honestly, the easiest way to do it these days.
Yeah, that's. I think people get scared maybe of asking.
Yep, they do.
Like 7-8 years ago, people were like, "Well, how do I find distributors?" And I'm like I want a Hasbro distributor. I'm like, call Hasbro's
Well, Hasbro and
800
ask.
number and ask
Yeah,
them. Yeah,
right.
they'll give it to you. You're coming off of a pretty big win from a trade show this weekend. Not just for your group, but also I saw that you guys had a great conversation with a brand owner. So this is a two-part question here. One, are trade shows worth attending when you're a beginner? And if they are, how would one prepare for them?
So trade shows are always worth it, whether you're a beginner, whether you're intermediate, or whether you're advanced. And the reason that trade shows are worth it, well, there's multiple reasons, right? First and foremost, if you're a beginner and you're attending a trade show and maybe you don't even have any wholesale accounts yet, you're brand new to this business, what better way to get your feet wet than to have these conversations face to face with suppliers in person, right? Because not only are you able to talk to 10, 20, 30, 50 people per day face to face, which is the best way to build a relationship, you also get the reps in that much quicker and you get immediate feedback, right? So if I'm talking to a brand owner at a booth and maybe I slipped up and said, maybe I just didn't pitch them the right way, I can kind of step back, think about what I might have done differently. And then 30 seconds later, I'm talking to another brand owner with my new and improved pitch, right? So it's just a much quicker feedback loop. And like I said, that face-to-face interaction is what allows you to build that rapport. You can build more rapport in 20 minutes face-to-face at a trade show than you could build in weeks or sometimes even months of phone calls and emails and Zoom meetings. So to answer your question, trade shows are the best way for any level of experienced Amazon seller to go and add quality wholesale accounts to their portfolio in the shortest amount of time.
There's some low-hanging fruit in the trade show industry. ASD, of course, being the one that everyone goes to.
Mm-hmm.
But what about you went to the Great Outdoors show, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I didn't know that one existed. I know that there are a couple, like there's Global Pet Expo here in Florida. There's several others. Where can I go to find trade shows that are happening? Maybe I don't want to travel, from Florida to Las Vegas, but I want to stay in the Southeast.
Yeah. So, and I will answer that question. I just realized I didn't answer the second part of your previous question, right? So you said, really, how do I, so let's say I'm going to this trade show. I know what show I'm going to go to, but how do I almost set myself up for success before the show? Was that kind of the question? Like, how do I know who to talk to? So that's the beauty of these trade shows is, guys, pretty much every trade show out there is going to have a website. And on their website, they're going to have what's called their exhibitor list. So this is a list of every single company that is paying to set up a booth at that trade show. And so if you're hearing this, you probably realize like you don't even need to necessarily attend the trade show in person to get benefit from this method. You can check out that, like you said, the trade show we went to this past weekend was the Great American Outdoor Show. Well, go to the website for the Great American Outdoor Show. They've got their exhibitor list, and it's like 983 companies, something like that. And so if you really want to be best prepared, you would go through that list before you actually go to the show. And you just start looking up some of the companies on Amazon, right? Seeing which brands are already on Amazon, which brands have third-party sellers, which brands look like they sell on Amazon themselves and they're probably not the best fit. So you're able to go in and take that list of 980 something exhibitors and slim it down to a short list of say 20, 30, 40, 50 suppliers. And then those are the ones that you have the conversations with in person there. Now, the second part of your question, right? How do I find these trade shows? How do I identify these trade shows? There's a really, really good resource that I think you might have told me this, or maybe Chris Potter shared this with me. And somehow, like, I'd never heard of it. I've been doing this for almost 8 years, and I'd never heard about this website until maybe 6 months ago. Guys, it's called 10times.com, the number 10, and then the word times.com. And what this website is it is a huge directory of every single trade show happening in the entire world, not just the United States, but everywhere in the world. And the beautiful thing about 10times.com is you can filter by region, you can filter by category, you can set a number of different filters. So what I've done many times over the years, I live here in North Carolina, I'll say, okay, I'll go to 10times.com and I say, show me every tool and home improvement trade show happening in North Carolina in the month of February 2025, right? And it might give me 20, 30, 50 different trade shows. And from there, I can kind of go through the list, pick out the ones I like, and decide which ones I want to attend. So that is a really, really underrated resource that's completely free that I recommend folks check out if they're interested in attending trade shows.
Corey, this is again something we've asked you before, but this might be my favorite piece of advice from you the many times that I've seen you. And this is key because I think we're going to have a lot of people, like, we're mainly an arbitrage show, right? So there are going to be people who might have scoffed when you said, salesmanship is the best. Number one, people don't realize how much they sell in general. We're
Right.
much bigger salesmen than we realize or give ourselves credit for. So, but there's when you're at a trade show and you're trying to talk to somebody, there's always that superficial layer that you have to break through, the ice, so to speak. And the number one, if there was a chart or a pecking order, the number one rebuttal that you need is when you get the response, we don't sell to Amazon sellers. What advice do you have when you get that dismissal attempt?
Yeah, and that is really the biggest fear that people have, is hearing that exact sentence that you said, right? Oh, sorry, we don't work with Amazon sellers. And guys, for what it's worth, we talked to 20, 30, 40 different booths at the trade show this past weekend, and not once did we hear that rebuttal, right? So it's not even as common as people think. But if you get hit with that rejection, which everybody will at some point, I just like to ask questions. I like to uncover why it is they have that policy, right? So I might say something along the lines of, okay, I understand. Sounds like you guys might have had a bad experience with an Amazon seller in the past. Is that kind of what's contributing to that policy? And then a lot of times they'll just kind of open up, right? And they'll just start spilling. They'll say, oh, yeah, well, we had so-and-so, this guy a couple years back, he promised us the world and then he didn't deliver. And then he tanked our prices and he was a pain to work with. And he would never, it would take 3 days to respond to emails. And so we just stopped working with Amazon sellers altogether. And then to that, you might say, oh, okay, shoot, that's bad. I don't blame you. I probably would feel the same way. But if you had a quote unquote Amazon seller who was actually a professional business owner who, takes pride in responding quickly, who's going to place large orders, who's going to be just like any one of your other maybe brick and mortar customers, I mean, is that somebody that you would feel more comfortable working with? And then kind of taking that approach of, all right, ask questions, understand why that is their policy, hear them out, let them vent, and then tailor your next response or your next couple of sentences to the exact things they said they didn't like, right? It's like, hey, if I hate X, well, what if I'm the opposite of X? What if I'm Y? Then can we work together? And that's kind of the approach that I take a lot of times I get that objection.
Thank you for listening to the Clear the Shelf podcast. My magnanimous co-host Chris Rasick has put together a gift for you for being a listener. It's called the Monthly Goal Tracking Spreadsheet, and it's free. The spreadsheet will help you break down and track how much you've purchased, which should be a leading indicator of how much you will sell, and then you'll be able to track how much you've sold as well as your estimated monthly profit on a daily basis. This will all feed into the daily averages so you can ensure that you're on track to meet your goals each and every month. Grab it for free today over at cleartheshelf.com/goal-tracking. Thanks again for being a listener. Now back to the show.
One of the things of not just wholesale sellers, but arbitrage sell, anybody wanting to sell on Amazon, you get the question, well, how do I know what sells? And so I'm curious, what are some of the factors that people should consider, especially beginners, when they start analyzing a product using Keepa or any other tool to make sure that what they buy is actually going to get them a return on their investment?
That's a good question. So, and this is something that, like you said, every Amazon seller needs a set of criteria and kind of goes through this process to determine what's worth my time and what's not worth my time. And trust me, take it from someone like myself that has bought a ton of bad products over the years, who's lost a ton of money making bad buying decisions. I've kind of taken those failures and those learnings and distilled those into 3 very simple criteria that myself or my team look for every time we're deciding if we're going to buy a product. It's like a 3-step checklist. So step 1, first and foremost, I want to make sure that there is existing FBA competition on those listings. All right. So I'm looking for products that have 2 or 3 or more FBA sellers already selling that product. And just to do a quick, deeper dive into that criteria, because a lot of people listening to this are probably thinking to themselves, wait, why would I want competition? Why do I want to compete with other sellers? Well, the reason you want to look for FBA competition is because if other folks are already selling that product, it's probably profitable, right? They're getting it for somewhere at a profit. Otherwise, they wouldn't be selling it. So that's the first criteria. I look for at least 2 to 3 FBA sellers on the listing. Second criteria, I want to make sure that Amazon themselves are not dominating the buy box. All right. At least 50% of the year. So if I look at that Keepa graph and I go back a whole year, as long as Amazon is not hogging the buy box for at least 6 months out of the last year, then that's a product that I feel comfortable testing, right? Because on the other end of the spectrum, if Amazon is in the buy box 98% of the time or 95% of the time over the last year, I just don't have a very good chance of competing with them, right? And then the last criteria is I look for products that are selling at least 50 units per month or more. Now, this third criteria, the 50 units per month or more, that's a little subjective because newer sellers might be perfectly content selling a product 5, 10, 15 times per month just to get that proof of concept, where people like myself, and again, depending on the price point and depending on the profitability, I usually only want to sell products where I can sell 50, 100, 500 sometimes units per month, right? So it's just those 3 criteria. If a listing passes those 3 criteria and the price that I can buy it at is profitable, then I will place a test order, make sure it goes well, make sure it is profitable. And then the second time around, then I might double down and go a little deeper on that product.
So you said you set a floor at least a couple other FBA sellers or offers on the listing. Is there a ceiling? Is there a max also, or is that something you can overcome with the relationship that you have or the bulk discounts that you can receive?
So there really isn't a max, right? And I'm sure you guys have seen these listings that, around Q4, around Christmas time, you look at the Keepa and that new offer count spikes to like 500 sellers, right? Like some of these arbitrage products, that Mr. Potato Head from like 2019, it was like one of the first like Q4 products I sold. I mean, that the listing had literally 1,000 FBA sellers on it at one point. Now, the reason I would still buy that product and still sell that product is because it's all about supply and demand. Even if there's 1,000 sellers on the listing, what if the listing sells 10,000 times a month or 20,000 times a month, right? I'm really taking the number of sellers and the number of units that I think I'm going to be able to sell per month divided by that estimated monthly sales. And as long as it hits my personal profit criteria, then I don't care if there's 1,000 other people selling it, right? I'm still able to hit my numbers. So for me, I don't have like an upper limit of the number of sellers I want to see on a listing. It's really all about the volume and then how many of those monthly sales I can personally capture when I'm taking into account all the other folks on the listing. Does that kind of answer the question there?
Yeah. Yeah. And that, in fact, that's probably advice that we should translate over to some arbitrage, some OA and RA too. You know, that's valuable. Any red flags that we should look out for when we're engaging with suppliers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, tons of red flags, right? And I probably can't even think of half of them off the top of my head. But first and foremost, I will avoid listings where I get an IP alert, right? Chris Grant, I know that's your tool. IP alert has saved me. I mean, I've been an IP alert subscriber for like 3 or 4 years. And if I click on a listing, if everything looks good, but then that IP alert pops up, I'm going to second guess it, right? Because it's telling me, hey, this brand is likely to file IP complaints. And in 2025, almost nothing is worth, risking your account over a little IP complaint. So if that IP alert pops up, I'm not touching it. That's probably the number one red flag and the one that's easiest to identify. Other red flags at the supplier level are, let's just say, poor communication, right? That's one factor that I absolutely hate, because there are suppliers that I've worked with that are legitimate, authorized, verified suppliers, but they take 3 days to respond to an email. Or I place an order and they don't even confirm it for like a week, right? So that's more personal preference. And I think because I've been around long enough, I don't necessarily have to work with those suppliers, but communication is huge for me. So if lack of communication is a huge red flag. And then things like, when you're buying from a distributor, let's say, and they're operating primarily on Instagram or Telegram, which is kind of like what we alluded to earlier. Guys, just legit suppliers don't really operate only on social media. Legit suppliers are going to have some sort of website. They're going to have a business address that you can look up on Google Earth and you can see, okay, this is a warehouse or this is a big office building. Like if their business address is a residential house, which you'd be shocked, it happens a lot, right? Because these unscrupulous suppliers are literally operating out of their house. That's a huge red flag as well.
So once we get suppliers all squared away, we know how to find products, and we've got our LLC all set up. There are a lot of people who wonder how the heck how am I gonna deal with this onslaught of potentially thousands of products? Not everyone's like our buddy Joe, who's working out of like an old Macy's,
Yeah, he's working out of a JCPenney. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you handle order fulfillment and prep? Are you using prep centers? Are you working with suppliers to get them to ship directly to Amazon? Because I mean, heck, a lot of people need to do this from their home and they don't want to. I know my wife is not going to let me use the garage to store pallets.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, really a couple of different options, right? So, like when I started Wholesale specifically, I was only working with suppliers who would ship to my 3PL, which is just about any supplier, right? 3PL is another term for prep center. A lot of folks know them as prep centers. So you've got the option to use a prep center, which is essentially an outsourced warehouse. You've also got the option. This is what I did for probably 8 or 9 months. I actually got a storage unit at a local storage facility, and it was a first floor unit. So that way, when I had pallets delivered, the property manager at the storage unit, she just had to kind of let them into my unit. They drop off the pallet and they go on their way, right? You don't want a second floor unit or higher, because then they can only take one pallet at a time into the freight elevator. And really quickly, those carriers are going to start to hate you, right? If they can only bring in one pallet at a time. But there are folks I know in our community, and I'm sure you know a lot of folks as well, that operate out of their house, and they do 6 figures, some of them 7 figures per year with Wholesale, because some suppliers won't ship to a residential house, but many will, right? So at the end of the day, it depends on you, your situation, how much time you have, right? Because you don't want to be doing a lot of your own prep. If you've got a W-2 job, I would use a prep center. So there's a bunch of different ways you can slice it depending on your specific situation.
Man, my HOA would kill me if I had a
Yeah,
a
semi
truck with a
coming down the
lift
street.
gate dropping off stuff.
Yeah, I bet. A lot of people would. I get it.
So let's talk about scaling. How do you now, arbitragers, we spend so much time sourcing new products. You can, and I've seen you say it actually. You have a pretty tight catalog overall. So what are the keys to making sure you stay in stock and actually scaling this up into 7 figures and beyond doing wholesale?
So the best way to scale wholesale is to go deeper with the suppliers that you're already doing business with, right? And this is for some reason, like, and it makes sense. I think most people listening to this would think it makes sense, right? Because it's like, okay, I've got a wholesale account open. I've been doing business with this supplier for a while. It's a lot easier to do more business with that supplier who already knows you, where you already have a track record, than it is to go and start a brand new relationship from scratch, because you've already got momentum with that existing supplier and you've already got that relationship. But that's a concept that for whatever reason took me like not months, but years to grasp. Because when I was starting out, I didn't really have a lot of guidance. I was kind of just going off YouTube videos and the one-off person I could talk to. And it wasn't until I got advice from somebody where he was like, dude, you're already like you're doing business with 3 or 4 solid distributors. Why are you spending so much of your time doing more outreach and looking for more suppliers? Wouldn't your time be better spent just buying more from the 3 or 4 that you're already working with? And I was like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And so once I did that and we got really focused and looked for as many ways as possible to maximize our business with the suppliers that already know us and already like us, that's when we really started to scale. That's when we kind of cracked through that 7-figure per year in revenue mark, because it's easier to work with a small number of quality suppliers than it is to work with a large number of maybe, mid-tier suppliers or lower quality suppliers, if that makes sense.
And I'd imagine the vetting process, the one kickback to that is, well, what if you lose a supplier? Then you've lost a larger percentage of your inventory flow. But I'd imagine the vetting process kind of counteracts that, right? I mean, what's your response to that in general?
Yeah. And so again, there's always a caveat to most things. So the caveat in this case is, yes, you want to focus on going deeper with your existing suppliers. Absolutely. That's the easiest and best way to scale. But as anybody who's been in this business for any amount of time knows, suppliers can cut you off at any time, right? So what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have all your eggs in the basket of 2, 3, 4 suppliers. You always want to be doing some form of outreach on the side, but it's just a smaller scale over time, right? So like right now, I've got some suppliers that I've been working with, some for years, and we've got a really good relationship and we're doing good business with them and it's consistent. But at the same time, I'm doing things like this past weekend, going to trade shows, trying to always add 1 or 2 really quality relationships per quarter or per 6 months, however you want to do it. So that way, when one of my current suppliers cuts me off, which will happen at some point, I've got a good pipeline of folks in the process that can maybe fill in those gaps, right? And I don't have to start over from scratch and build that momentum once I've already been cut off. I've already done kind of that legwork, if that makes sense.
What a concept, being prepared to adapt.
Yeah, shocker. Yeah.
We've extolled the virtues of wholesale, but we'd be remiss if we did not tell the truth and talk about some of the challenges. So in 2025 and beyond, what do you think some of the bigger challenges are going to be facing wholesale sellers on Amazon?
So I think one of the bigger challenges is going to be sellers knowing how to provide value to brands. All right. Because as we said earlier, really the holy grail of wholesale is having a relationship directly with the brand / manufacturer and being able to buy from them repeatedly over time. Now, the best brands, they don't just let you buy from them. You've got to show them some value in addition to just placing an order. Because the way that I see it, there's always going to be somebody out there that can outspend me. So if I call up a brand and I try to pitch them on, hey, I want to place a $5,000 order, $10,000 order, $50,000 order, a lot of times they're going to say, well, great, we already had somebody who wanted to place a $100,000 order, right? What more can you do for us than just spending money? And again, I think that's going to be a lot of sellers' bottleneck is maybe they have the capital and maybe they're willing to make the calls, but they don't really know how to add that extra layer of value. And the way to do that and learn how to do that is by asking questions, right? Because a lot of brands, like I'll give you a good example here, right? So this is a buddy of mine. He was talking about he was trying to land an exclusive with this brand and to sell their products on Amazon. And this brand was saying, they've had all kinds of different Amazon sellers pitch them on, we can optimize your listings, we can run your PPC, we can do XYZ, we can do all these things for you. But nobody was listening to the brand because what the brand truly wanted, they were like, listen, man, you can have the Amazon exclusive. We just want to get our counterfeiters on eBay cleaned up. We just got to get our counterfeit products off of eBay. If you guys can solve that one problem for us, you can have the exclusive on Amazon. And he was like, okay, we'll get on that. And so he partnered with a law firm of some sort to kind of get this brand's counterfeiting situation cleaned up on eBay. Took a few months, but he was able to get it done. And he landed the exclusive with the brand on Amazon as a result, all because he was willing to ask the question, hey, what is your problem? What do you guys actually need help with? Whereas 95% of sellers go in with a pre-made pitch and they don't really hear out the brand. They're just saying what they think the brand wants to hear, when in reality, they don't even know what the brand wants to hear. Right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm curious, what's the best piece of advice that you've heard over the last half a year, that's had an effect on your business specifically?
So best piece of advice I've heard that's had a good effect on the business, I would say it's just the simple principle of staying focused on one singular plan of attack for an extended period of time, right? So myself, I'm sure like you guys, I'm sure like most entrepreneurs out there, we tend to get shiny object syndrome. We tend to, for example, we get started with wholesale and maybe we even get some momentum. We're placing orders, things are going well. And then we're like, oh, let's go try private label, or, oh, let's go try arbitrage, right? Or something completely different. And then it's like the momentum you built in the wholesale business screeches to a halt. A month or two goes by and you're like, wait, now I've got to get wholesale back up and running. Then you've got to rebuild that momentum, right? So really just the concept of focus and focusing on one key thing that needs to be done to move yourself forward and just hammering that, laser focusing on that for an extended period of time and trying to limit distractions. That's probably the best advice I've gotten. And the advice that I continue to give myself, because every day I feel the urge to add something new or do something different, but I gotta remind myself to stay the course.
Yeah. It's simple, but very, very important.
Yeah. And not easy either. I mean, I have a serious problem with that, but
yeah, I mean, I think every entrepreneur does. And then one more thing I might add to that too, right? Because I was kind of going between two pieces of advice. I think this one's worth mentioning as well. And it is to focus on inputs as opposed to outputs, right? Lead measures versus lag measures in your business. So to kind of bring that down to a tactical level for wholesale sellers or Amazon sellers in general, a lot of folks, they're laser focused on the revenue goal or the profit goal or the margin goal, which is great. And you should have those goals, but far fewer people are determining, okay, what are the inputs that I need to conduct every day to then hit my profit goal or my revenue goal or my margin goal. So I'm looking at my whiteboard here right now. My main goal in my Amazon business is to spend a certain amount of money every single week, right? For me right now, it's $60K per week on inventory. So I know, hey, if I spend $60K a week on inventory, then my profit goal is probably going to take care of itself, right? Assuming I'm buying good inventory and I can control how much inventory I can buy, whereas I can't necessarily control my profit or my revenue as much as I can control that other input, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good advice. I'm trying to remember the book, or does that come from? I can't remember. There's a really good book that talks about setting your goal and then just focusing on the process.
There's a few.
Myth, Jeff Hayden.
Motivation myth. Yeah. That's
And
great.
another good one too, and this one I haven't really ever heard anyone talk about this one, but it's called The Four Disciplines of Execution, and it's by, I think, Chris McChesney is the name of the author. Kind of an older book, but the whole concept of the book is lead measures versus lag measures, right? Focusing on, hey, what is it that Corey Ganem needs to do every day to move the needle in the business, and focusing less on what is the outcome that I want to achieve, because that outcome's, like I said, it's going to fall into place if I'm hitting my daily inputs. And another good one, Traction by Gino Wickman. I'm sure you guys have read that one.
Yeah, that's a good
Talks
one.
a lot about goal setting and KPIs and having a number that you're responsible for, usually an input number. Lots of good books on those topics for sure.
This is a really good, that was a really good lead into the next question. I only know maybe one or two other people that read more than you do. One of them is a podcaster, and like that's what he does for his job. So outside of the books that you've mentioned, what book have you read in the past 6 months for the first time that has had the biggest impact on you?
Let me pull up my list here. But one that comes to mind right off the bat it's called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And it's by
Oh, yeah.
Dan
Is that
Sullivan
the-
and Benjamin Hardy.
Benjamin Hardy. Yeah.
Such a good book. And really the whole concept behind it is, okay, if you wanted to 2X your business, right? So I think last year I did just over 3 million in revenue. If I wanted to get to 6 million in revenue, the book's concept is, well, it's pretty, the path to get to 6 million is pretty easy, right? The 2X path is relatively straightforward. You just do more of what you're already doing, and you do it for a couple of years, and then you double your business. But the concept behind the book is, well, let's just ask the theoretical question. What if I wanted to 10X my business? What if I wanted to go from 3 million a year to 30 million a year? What is it that I would have to do to get there? And by simply asking that question, it forces you to stretch your imagination and forces you to stretch your mind on what's possible, and helps you laser focus on, okay, if I needed to 10X my business this year instead of 2X it, I would only have to do two things, right? I would need to spend all my time on making sure we're buying good inventory and sourcing more capital to do so, because I just don't have enough capital. So like theoretically, I could do 30 million in revenue this year, and I know exactly what I would need to do it. I would need to go out and raise a bunch of money and get or really expand our sourcing team to buy more products. It's really those two things. Now, I don't necessarily want to 10X my business. I don't necessarily want to sell 30 million a year on Amazon, but I know how to do it if I needed to. And that book kind of lays out the framework for how to think about that process in any business, right? Not just Amazon. You could be a service business. You could be a solopreneur. You could be doing anything, and the same principles apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure people are going to want to follow you, going to want to maybe connect with you, maybe learn more about you and the things that you do. Where should people go to be able to learn more about you?
So I would point folks to my podcast, which is rightfully titled the Amazon Wholesale Podcast. So we've got, I think, 90 episodes now that you could binge watch from day one, where I sit down with other successful wholesale sellers, folks that are doing this stuff day to day. And I just interview them about what makes them successful, tips, tricks, etc., for succeeding with the wholesale business. And I would point folks specifically to episode 87, right? It's where I sit down with Flips for Miles and Garrett Gorel, other folks who are in the community. And we go deep into it's kind of like what we're talking about in this episode, but we cover a little more deeper on some of the tactics. So Amazon Wholesale Podcast, episode 87 is where I would tell people to start.
Nice. Yeah, you're a machine with the content, man. I got to give you that.
Well, it's having good people on the back end, right? It's all I have to do is show up, and they make it easy. So I got to give credit to folks like Grant and the team overseas and people like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. We always end the show with a quote of the week, and this one happens to come from one of my favorite Stoic thinkers, Seneca. It is, apply yourself to thinking through difficulties. Hard times can be softened, tight squeezes widened, and heavy loads made lighter for those who can apply the right pressure. And I think this is something you're actually pretty good about. You know what your lead inputs need to be able to make sure that things are a little bit easier. So Yeah, that's it, man. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you. And that's the pod, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Clear the Shelf with Chris and Chris. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot on your phone and share it to Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite FBA group. And be sure to tag me and let me know why you liked it and what you'd like to hear more from us in the future. Also, I'd like to give you some free gifts for listening. Head over to rabbittrailchallenge.com and repricerchallenge.com for some free courses to further your business. Thanks for listening.